to have your wisdom and your knowledge. So maybe you could start off by giving us a little introduction to yourself and how you kind of became a political activist.
Well, I'll do my best to make it a little introduction. I don't like talking about myself, although I wrote a book about it. Well, like so many young Black men, I went to prison at the age of 19. I was wrongfully convicted of armed robbery and murder and sentenced to life and 50 years in the Missouri State Penitentiary, one of the worst hellholes in America. It used to be known as the bloodiest 47 acres in America. And it was while in prison, well, actually, shortly before I got to prison, you know, I was politically awakened in the first instance by a priest by the name of Father Clark, who was opposed to the death penalty. He came to visit me while I was in the city jail in St. Louis. And that was the first time in my life I had come into contact with a person in the movement, you know, fighting for the rights of someone else. He was Irish. His parents were coal miners, and you know, going all the way back to the days of the Molly Maguires. So anyway, I met this amazing individual, and he was in there to try to help save my life. He was a total stranger to me, and so that got me to thinking, you know, about the movement and whatnot. And when I got to prison, the conditions there were so hard, particularly with regard to racism and whatnot, that I immediately got engaged in the fight to end the segregation in the prison, because they had Black people, you know, stacked up 6 men to a cell, while white people were like two men to a cell and 1 man to a cell, and then so they had us living like animals, and the food was horrible. So that's when my conscious political engagement began. Was in that situation there, and during that time I did a lot of reading and a lot of studying and whatnot, and became convinced that that communism was the answer to capitalism. I studied Karl Marx, you know, everything I get my hands on with regard to Karl Marx, even stuff that was against him, you know, I read it. And I learned a lot from the people who were against him, you know. So I became a political prisoner by my own design, you know. And so eventually I developed a contact with the movement. I wrote the chairman of the Communist Party of Missouri, and expressed to him my concerns about what was going on in the prison, and that I wanted to get involved in the movement. Well, of course, I couldn't join the party from inside the jail cell, you know, but they did put me in contact with the state representative, a woman named Deverne Calloway, who was an amazing person, and I got in contact with the movement through them, and eventually that movement, and then I kept up with that movement as it was going along, and eventually I got in contact with the Black Panther Party. Eventually I connected with the campaign to free Angela Davis and all political prisoners. I actually had a defense committee before Angela did. You know? But when they formed one for her, my committee just joined up with that one, you know. And so it's a long story. If you're interested in details, I have a book out about it called "The Damned Don't Cry," you know. So the short end of it is that I eventually got out as a result of the efforts of the movement, you know. And in 1976, I came home, and I haven't been back in anybody's prison since. And on coming home, I joined the movement. I joined the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. That was in 1976. In 1979, I went to New York to become an assistant to Charlene Mitchell, who at that time was the executive director. she trained me to take her place. And in 1981, I became executive director of the National Anti-Racism Political Repression, and I've been kind of involved with that organization in one form or another ever since, you know. And we have fought in many a campaign. We fought Freedom Wilmington 10. We fought around the Joanne Little case, who was a young Black woman who had been raped repeatedly by the prison guard. And one day he tried to rape her and she killed him. And everybody thought we would lose that case, but we won that case, you know. So this organization has proved to me that we can do the impossible. It just takes longer, you know. And so that's kind of like what my background is. Presently, I'm here in Chicago. Been here. I've been in and out of Chicago off and on for the last 30 some odd years, but I've been here consistently for about 10 years now, working with them to organize a campaign back there on the wall for community control of the police. And we're very close to winning this campaign now. You know, very close to winning it. And we owe that to the Georgia Floyd Rebellion that happened in 2020.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about what community control of the police is and the advances that you've won in Chicago? Sure. I think I read that you had something like 14 aldermen who were in support. I think I'd read that you'd made some major advances in terms of.
Yeah, we have almost a majority of the alder people now supporting it. You know, a couple of years ago we had 8, and then we got up to 17. Now we're up to almost 26, and I think we'll get past 26 because this is a call whose time is now, whose time has come, and community control of the police is a basic fundamental democratic demand that has existed in the Black Liberation movement going all the way back to the days of Marcus Garvey. Well, actually going all the way back to the fall of Reconstruction, the overthrow of Reconstruction in 1877. Because during that brief period of 10 years, that is the only time in the history of this country that Black people had a decisive voice in who policed their communities and how their communities were policed. And that's because we had achieved that level of political power in the Black belt of the South during that particular time, you know, particularly in South Carolina, you know, where we had achieved so much political power until W.E. Du Bois characterized that as the dictatorship of the Black proletariat. But, you know, that wasn't what it was, though. You know, it was a little too much there. But that was a revolutionary period. And during that revolutionary period, one of the ways in which we defended the gains of the revolution was we had a decisive voice. We had the decisive voice in saying who policed our communities and how our communities were policed. Once Black radical Reconstruction was overthrown, the police went back to being like they were during the time of slavery. That is a agency of repression and to block us from gaining our rights, you know, our constitutional rights and our democratic rights. And so this demand has always come up. It came up back during the anti-lynching campaign with Ida B. Wells then. It came up with Marcus Garvey during that period. It came up, it was one of the 10 demands of the Nation of Islam, and it came up in the Black Panther Party. And basically what we're saying is this here. It's a principle of self-determination. We as a people, given the nature of our oppression, which is national in character, we as a people have an unalienable democratic right to say who polices our communities and how our communities are policed. And the reason why we're denied that right is because the police are used by our oppressors to keep us in place, to keep us from getting out of the oppression that they have put us in. And so this is a very important struggle because the police are the ones who deny us the organizing space that we need to build a movement to bring about some systemic changes. And we have to fight for that organizing space by fighting for community control of the police. To the extent that we get that control, get organizing space for the Black Liberation movement to achieve what we need to achieve, and that's freedom, justice, and equality.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, go on, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to ask, I think a lot of young people in particular have kind of gravitated to this idea of abolish the police, which is distinctively not what you're saying here. So maybe could you talk about why that maybe not the best avenue for change, I suppose?
Well, our organization was started by two powerful revolutionary movements in this country, and that is the revolutionary movement for Black liberation and the revolutionary movement for socialism. Those two strands of the people's movement was very much involved in the creation of the National Alliance Against Racism and Political Repression. So we have a very definite outlook and concept about what the role of the state is, and we can't be delusional about that, Otherwise, you'll end up asking the enemy to give you things that they can't give you, They can't give us abolition of the police. They can't give us that. In order to get that, we'd have to have state power, and we can't have state power this side of the revolution. That comes after the revolution, not before, So that's how we look at it. But at the same time, we're not antagonistic to anybody or any group, any formation that's fighting against police crimes, that's fighting against the police tyranny that is reigning in our communities, And we try to bring them in by showing them and convincing them that that's a long distance goal that we as radicals and revolutionaries share with you, but that's not what is right in front of us right now. The Black community is demanding justice, and so is the Chicano community, the brown community, demanding justice, and that means that we want these police held accountable for the crimes that they're committing against us. And we believe that we should be the ones who hold them accountable. Therefore, we believe in community control of the police. And once we get community control of the police, or some semblance of it, it's not going to come like in one big package all at one time. We'll get it in stages, as the revolutionary process proceeds. But to the extent that we have it, we can do our own defunding. We can defund them ourselves. We can abolish the use of deadly force in particularly in situations where somebody is running and you're shooting them in the back, But we can regulate the use of deadly force. Period. We can stop racial profiling. We can take and end the pattern and practice of racial discrimination that has existed with the police going back over 100 years. We can do that if we have community control of the police. Those are things that we can do. Those are things that we can do as a result of a democratic movement that gets control of the police. We can end police tyranny and terror in our communities. We don't have to wait on socialism, or we don't have to wait on a new system to do that. We can wage a democratic struggle to get that done now.
Well, that makes absolute sense. It's a much more pragmatic way, I think, of looking at things. So in terms of the National Alliance today, could you maybe talk about its refounding in 2019, and how many cities are there alliances in, and what is the work currently?
Yeah, well, given the level of repression that's going on in the country, particularly with regard to police crimes, but also what's going on the Mexican border with the immigrants, what's going on in the immigrant community in terms of ICE, detention centers, all of the repression that's going on against Black people and brown people. We decided to bring back the Alliance as a national organization. because we were facing these problems on a national scale. And we wanted to do it in Chicago because in Chicago, we have made the greatest headway in terms of the struggle for community control of the police. And so we put a call out to the nation. We sent the call everywhere, to the nation to join us in Chicago to refound the National Alliance Against Racism and Repression. And people did. At the opening plenary session of our conference, 1,100 people showed up from, I think it was 26 states in the United States. Yeah, over 26 states, 150 different organizations, mostly young people, significantly Black and brown people. The majority were Black and brown, but there was also about a third of the people that came were white, but not just white without a class. They mostly came from the working class, and that's important to point out. And the same thing is true of the Black and brown people that came there. Of course, we're 90% working class anyway, but it was a great turnout, a great meeting of young people. We had people in the LGBTQ community there. We had people of all different political persuasions, from those who just want to get some decent reforms to those who want revolution. Everybody was welcome. Everybody who wants to bring about some change. And so we refounded the National Alliance Against Racism and Repression in November 2019. And we're steady growing. We called our first national demonstration around the George Floyd case, in which we had 19 different cities to join us in our call. And of those 19 cities, we got out. We mobilized. Our organization mobilized over 200,000 people. But it was a great rebellion. That's why we were able to mobilize so many, because it was a rebellion that involved over 26 million people, and it took place in all 50 states of the United States. But the organized part of it was us. We were the organization here in Chicago, in Minneapolis, in Dallas, Texas, in Los Angeles, in Jacksonville, Florida, in St. Louis, throughout the country. We had people working with us and working in our name. So this was a great beginning for us, and we proved our mustard with the George Floyd uprising. Now we are a organized, significant component of that rebellion.
Yeah, and I have to say, going back to the refounding conference, Kent SDS took several people there, and I have to say, it was incredible just to see the number of folks there and to hear, all the speakers. I remember you gave, a fantastic speech. Angela Davis was there, which was, super amazing. And yeah, just so incredible to see so many young people, especially.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I guess with this, and you mentioned that this rebellion that's been happening in the country, and we've been seeing so many people out in the streets. And obviously the Chauvin trial, happened recently, and he's been convicted. But we have several other cops coming up. How do we keep this movement, active? How do we, prevent people from just sliding back into, I guess, complacency?
Well, rebellions, they come, they come like waves. They ebb and they flow. But as freedom fighters, we have to look at what do we do during the ebb tide, and during the ebb tide, we have to stay in the communities and organize. And our slogan in Chicago is we organize door by door, block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood. That's how we organize, because we have to build a firm base in our communities so that we are organizing for some fundamental social change and not just political theater. And we have been doing that successfully. And so one of the, to answer your question specifically, one of the ways of doing this is to be actually involved in a political campaign. We have to initiate these campaigns ourselves. You know, like the campaign for community control of the police here in Chicago, we initiated that, we built that, you know, and we're doing it also in other places. You know, a slogan without a program doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean a thing. You know, we learned that during the Black Power movement. You know, we learned that if you can have a slogan that, you know, makes people say, wow, but if you don't have no program to carry out what you have a slogan for, then it's nothing. It'll die out. And so we're not just saying community control the police or defund the police or abolish the police as a slogan. We have a movement. We have an organized movement with a program of action to bring about these changes that we're talking about. We have a fighting machine, and that's what you need.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. So I hope that we can pivot maybe to your book that you've recently put out, which has been causing a lot of buzz, at least in my circles. People seem to really enjoy it.
Which one is that?
The new one, Black Liberation and Socialism.
Oh, this one here. This one.
That's the one. There you go.
Okay.
Really great book. And one of the guiding principles, I think, of it, and I think you mentioned this earlier, was this idea of national oppression. So maybe you could explain that a little bit for folks who may not be familiar with that terminology.
Yeah. Well, the point that the book makes goes deeper than that. Although that's a part of it. The point that the book makes is that, in fact, I say it it's on the back cover. This book is about the historic relationship between two great revolutionary struggles: the struggle for Black liberation and the struggle for socialism in the United States, but also in the world. Now, on what is that based? It's based on the fact that's often overlooked that Marxism, when it emerged, when it first came about, from the first time it was announced in the Communist Manifesto in 1848, had always taken the position, all workers of the world unite. Workers of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains. You have a world to gain. A lot of people didn't understand that Marx and Engels and the Communist League, they were not just talking about white workers. They were not just talking about European workers. They were talking about workers of the world. And they were especially talking about people who were enslaved, because they understood the connection between slavery, chattel slavery, and wage slavery. You know, they understood that connection, and they unflinchingly stood in unconditional solidarity with the movement of the slaves to be free. They did that, you know. And in my book, I'm saying that the reason why they did that, because they understood that the indispensable precondition for self-emancipation for wage workers is the emancipation of chattel slaves. That's a precondition. You can't have one getting free without the other, you know. And the utopian socialists made the mistake of thinking that, well, we can free the white, we need to argue and appeal to the moral conscience of our fellow white people to give the white workers justice. And then as a fallout, Black folks will get free. That was their position. Free the right working class first, then black slaves will get free later, you know, and they'll be freed by the white working class once they're freed by the capitalists. That was not the position that Marx and Engels took, and that was not the position that communists of that period took, you know. And so if you check it out, look, when the communists first came to the shores of North America, they united with the struggle to abolish slavery, you know, and you could not be a member of a communist club if you didn't take that position. You couldn't. And see, so I read a lot of books on Marxism and a lot of books on the history of Marxism, but I was not satisfied with them leaving that out, with there not being any emphasis on this, because this is the revolutionary essence of Marxism. You take away that component and it loses its revolutionary essence. Proof of that is real simple. When the First International went into a demise and the Second International was born, what happened? What happened was the Second International, they would not fight racism. They would not fight for the freedom of the people in the colonies. You know, it became socialism for white people. That's what it became. And that situation was not corrected until Lenin and the Bolsheviks came along. They corrected that. If you read the manifesto of the Communist International, the Third International, it's right up there, right in front of the manifesto. Well, they say, and I say it in my book. They say that you know, they break with the Second International. They break with the Second International, and they break with them on this question. You know, that it was for socialism for white people. That's what they said. Those are their words, not mine. And so they're saying what? They're saying that you know, this has to come to an end. The Communist International breaks once and for all with the traditions of the Second International, which in reality only recognize the white race. Right there. I take that from the manifesto of the Communist International, 1920, 1921. So then, at that point, the revolutionary essence of Marxism was restored. And now, when they talked about workers of the world unite, they said workers of the world and oppressed people of the world unite, including the colonies. And Marx talked about that, you know, over and over again in his critique of Proudhon, The Poverty of Philosophy. He talks about the pivotal role of slavery in the development of capitalism. In his many letters and his correspondence between him and Engels, where he discusses the colonies in India, and where he discusses what's going on in China and so forth and so on, he makes this point over and over again. He points out that what you had in the colonies was direct slavery, that it wasn't disguised with wages, it was direct, you know, and that the workers of Europe could not be free as long as these people were not free. Slavery, labor in a white skin cannot be free if labor is sold and branded in a black skin. That was what Marx said. So this book is about restoring the revolutionary essence of Marxism. Well, no, we're not doing it. The Third International did that. It's about talking about how that took place, and it's in that historical context that the national question arises. That the national question is approached, because what does capitalism do? It creates nations, and then it oppresses those nations that it creates. It's done it in Europe. It's done it in Africa. It's done it in Asia. It did it in the United States. You know, and you know, there were nations already here when they got it, you know, or developing nations. The indigenous people were developing nations, you know, and so they oppressed them, you know. And then the Chicano people in the Southwest, you know, they emerged as a nation. They oppressed them. And of course, Black people, they forged them into a nation with chains, whips, guns, and swords, you know. That's how that's how we were fashioned into a nation at the point of a gun, at the lash of a whip, you know, and shackles. That's how we developed our national consciousness in the context of chattel slavery, you know, and our geographical ground from which we sprung was the deep South, was the South, which you know, during the 20s and the 30s, the communists called it the Black Belt. But the communists didn't create the Black Belt. Chattel slavery created the Black Belt. They recognized the existence of the Black Belt. The communists did not create the Black national consciousness. They recognized the existence of it. The communists did not create a Black nation in the United States. They recognized that one had emerged. And this book talks about how that happened, how that happened, you know, and why when the Communist International did come about, how it brought about a situation for the first time in history that realized what Marx was talking about. It brought about a situation where you had a merger of the class struggle with the struggle for national liberation. Marx talked about the necessity of it, but it didn't happen. It didn't happen in terms of a movement until the emergence of the Third International, which you know, which revitalized the Marxism as a revolutionary movement. They responded to the treachery of the Second International, and so you know, so the book gets into that in detail, and also it says to us, those of us that are confronted with these problems today, draw lessons from the achievements of the revolutionary movements of the past. The communists made remarkable strides and great achievements in the Deep South at a time when nobody else would go down there and do nothing. You know, they were down there organizing and working with oppressed Black people and poor white people in the Sharecroppers Union, in building up trade union movements in the textile industries and the coal mines. They openly, unashamedly, and boldly fought for Black and white unity and achieved it over and over again in strike after strike, instance after instance, you know. And so much so until you got a lot of scholars now who are making a career out of writing books and talking about that, you know. But we don't just want to talk about it as a fascinating study. We want to know, how do we use that experience to continue the revolutionary process today?
No, that's really fantastic. But just to back up for a moment, could you maybe explain what constitutes a nation, or what that means?
Well, the classical definition of what constitutes a nation comes from Lenin and Stalin, you know, in terms of Marxism-Leninism, and that is a nation, in order to exist, has to have a common territory, a common language, a common psychological makeup or culture. Those are the fundamental aspects of a nation. And of course, economics, you know, they have to be bound together economically. And so Black people as a people fit all of that criteria back during the 20s. And so people say, well, things have changed. Back during the 20s, Black folks were like 80-some% landless peasants living in the deep South on plantations and what have you. A rural population. They're not like that today. Today they've been urbanized. They are they're not landless. They're not a majority landless peasants. Now they're majority proletarians, working class. Well, this gets into another aspect of what a nation is. A nation also consists of different classes, and so because the class composition of the nation has changed, don't mean that we have ceased to be a nation. There's still that common territory called the Black Belt. And I point that out in the book. A lot of people don't realize it. 57% of the Black population is still in the Black Belt. And if you look at the political struggles that are going on today, like for example, what really defeated Trumpism in the last election, it took place in the Black Belt. The struggle around the issue of voting rights and whatnot, that's going on in the Black Belt. It's because Black people are still fighting to finish the unfinished revolution of 1867, 1877. That particular revolution, which we call the Civil War, that particular revolution, the gains of that particular revolution were abolished and overthrown and abolished by white Ku Klux Klan terrorism and the northern capitalists, the monopoly capitalists, because imperialism was emerging, turning their backs on Black people and allowing this to happen, because they also saw a way of kind of like using the backwardness of the South to increase their profits. So you still got that fight going on right now. So it's not by accident that Georgia is the eye of this political hurricane that's going on in the South. Georgia is a deep Southern state. Georgia is right there in the Black Belt. So we're not just talking about past history, we're talking about present history, and we're not just talking about Black folks as that were a nation then and passed into something else now. No, we were a nation. We were an oppressed nation then, and we are an oppressed nation now, because we never got our freedom as an oppressed nation. So we're still an oppressed nation, and we're still fighting for the same things that we were fighting for then. We're still fighting for voting rights. We're still fighting for an end to economic enslavement. You name any economic index, employment, quality of jobs, any of that, and you're going to have Black people damn near at the bottom most of the time. Unemployment rate, this pandemic has brought out the contradictions in terms of healthcare. 70% of the people that were dying from the pandemic here in Chicago were Black. Are we 70% of the population in Chicago? Nope. But we are an oppressed people here, just like we are in Georgia. So yes, these questions are very much alive today, and we have to address them. But so I didn't only talk about the composition of the Black nation and the reality of it, but also what the struggle is today for Black liberation.
Thank you a lot for that. I think at this point, I'd like to move to some audience questions, if that's all right.
Some what kind of questions?
Some audience submitted questions.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So we have one here that asks, how would you persuade certain people who see the white sector of the working class as particularly reactionary or wholly reactionary? Is that an accurate claim, or?
Well, this is always, there's always been this, because there's always been, in the United States, there's always been racism. That's foundational in terms of this country. But, we have to ask the question about what is racism used for, and can we defeat that? And the question is, racism is used to divide the working class and keep the working class oppressed. So if you're about fighting for the liberation of the working class, fighting for the self-emancipation of the working class, then racism has to be on top of the agenda. We have to fight that. We have to fight it. We can acknowledge, yes, there are misguided white workers. Yes, there are white workers who are racist. But then what? We have to have a program for fighting that, like the communists did. And the communists still do. Because didn't we fight that in the 30s? Yeah, we did. Were we successful? Yes. We were able to get black and white workers to unite and fight back. And why were we able to do that? On what basis were we able to do that? We were able to do that on the basis that they face a common oppressor and the economic conditions. I'm a materialist. I'm not just a materialist. I'm a dialectical materialist. And that means that I believe that ideas and whatnot, they come, the basis of them is material reality. And material reality in our society, in any society, is economics. Economics. How do people actually live? And when you have a situation where you have capitalists exploiting and living off of workers like vampires, whether they be black, brown, or white, that is the reality. That is the basis on which you must form a united fight. That is more powerful than an idea. That's the only thing that can defeat the idea. Hunger, disease. When I was in prison, I organized white prisoners to fight against a prison system that was fucking us both around. And this in my book, The Damn Don't Cry. And some of these white prisoners had Nazi mentalities. Some of them were like Aryan Brotherhood shit, So how did we win them over? Because we constantly kept in front of them what the reality was. You got on the same green suit that I got on, eating the same slop in it that I'm eating. Your ass is going into a cell every day that's like mine. So you think the guards are gonna let you come up there in the guard dining room and sit down with them and break bread with them? No. But they're gonna tell you about your white skin. And you're gonna fall for that shit. But when you get tired of eating that slop, when you get tired of them treating you the way that they treat you, which is only different quantitatively from the way that they treat us, not qualitatively, then you'll join us. And a lot of them did. But that's the only way you win in this type of a situation. Otherwise, you're surrendering to the idea that the system can't be defeated. Because if the only way that we can pass, the only way that we can overthrow this system is through black and white unity, then that's what you got to fight for. You can't tell me that black and white unity is impossible. What you're telling me is that you're not willing to fight for it. If you fight for it, you will discover in the dirt and blood of battle that it is possible.
No, that makes absolute sense. We have another question here. You talked about the abolition demands versus struggle for community control. Is the United States and related institutions capable of accountability and control? Is a sort of dual power possible?
Well, that's like it's like asking a slave, is the master capable of freeing you? No, hell no. That's why we have to have a struggle, No. We're not talking about what they're capable of doing. We're talking about what we're capable of doing. And what we're capable of doing is more of us than it is them. We can unite the many against the few. And what we're capable of doing is bringing about some changes. You may not get everything that you fight for at any given moment in this struggle, but you're gonna have to fight for all you get. See, we have to get out of the mentality that the powers that be are going to give us something. They're not going to give us shit. We have to fight for it. We have to get out of this mentality of begging the powers that be for reforms, for change. No, we demand change, and then we back those demands up with organized struggle. As long as you beg, that's exactly what you're going to be doing, begging, because they ain't giving up nothing to a beggar, But if you fight, you'll get concessions, and eventually you'll win. We know this. If there hadn't been 26 million people in the streets in 50 states of these United States, that pig in Minneapolis that murdered George Floyd, he would not have been convicted. They would have let him go, like they let so many others go. We've seen hundreds, thousands let go that have done the same thing he did, murder us. But the rebellion put a different twist on it. That was a people's victory. That was not something that was given to us by the system because they felt that a tremendous injustice was done. All that bullshit that they got up there and talked on the witness stand about he was an extraordinary he was a cop operating outside of the norm of what police do. We all know that's bullshit. He was trained to do what he did. That's what they do to us. And they ain't tricked no black people into thinking, at least any black people who were thinking, they ain't tricked us into thinking that he was abnormal, that he was out of pocket. No, he's part of the police force. And they've proven it since the conviction because they continue to kill more people. They killed a 13-year-old kid in Chicago just the other day with his hands up. Shot him down. So just shot a black man in the back of the head. So, this is since George Floyd. This is during the trial. This is since we had a partial victory. And I consider getting him convicted, getting Derek Chauvin convicted, I consider that a partial victory. But that's nothing compared to what we got to do. We got to bring about a systemic change. That's not it. Getting one cop convicted every 100 years. That's not the systemic change we're talking about, So, Yeah, I mean, I may have went a little bit over on that, but I hope that answered your question.
No, I think that's great. One more here. What is your understanding of the significance of what happened at Kent State in May of 1970, and what meaning should that hold for us today?
Kent State and Jackson State. That was a terrible moment in our history. It showed. It's a shame that these kind of tragedies have to take place to wake people up, but that's the nature of the beast, you know. Some of these kids that shot them guns were not too much older than the kids that they killed, right? So
Yeah.
this is what this system does. It trains people to stop progress to the point of death. People in the army, people in the police force, investigative bodies, FBI, et cetera, you know. They are trained to do those things to us. They're trained because they will go to any length to stop change. Any length. Murder. That's what they put them in uniform for, the murder. And so that was a wake-up call that the same military, the same mentality that can go over there and murder tens of thousands of Vietnamese have no qualms with also murdering us. Same, you know. And don't think that you're privileged. Don't think that you're beyond that because you're white. You know, because Kent State was a lesson in white privilege, the limits of it. You go up against this system, they don't give a fuck about you being white. They're gonna kill you. They killed Viola Liuzzo before they killed anybody at Kent State. They killed the rabbi before, you know, I mean, they'll kill you. That's what they will do. They killed white people during the overthrow of Reconstruction. They ain't gonna tell you about it, but they killed a lot of white people then. They didn't even count the bodies because they were against the status quo, because they were fighting for the oppressed. These kids were against war and the national oppression of the Vietnamese people. And they killed them for it. And so, you know, we have to find what it is that unites us and hang on to that and struggle for that. White privilege doesn't unite us. It's a fucking myth, you know. The main privilege that they have in this country and in this world is class privilege. That's the main privilege. They can brainwash you into thinking a whole lot of other shit, but that's the main privilege that they have. The privilege and the right for some to exploit others, for the few to exploit and oppress the many. That's what it boils down to. And sometimes it takes a Kent State to wake us up to that fact. That if you are opposed to the powers that be, if you are opposed to the power, to those, to the militaries, to the jingos who are engaged in war for profits, you opposed to them, You messing with their purse. You messing with their purse. You know. You didn't see a lot of CEOs and junior executives and shit in Wall Street going out protesting against the Vietnam War. You saw these young college kids. They're expendable. They're expendable. Either they're expendable by going to the war and dying on the battlefield over there for this bullshit, or they're expendable if they oppose the war and have to kill them to teach them a lesson. And the great lesson here is that, like Michael Jackson said, they don't care about us. That's the great lesson here. And you got to figure out who us is, you know, because some people are getting confused about that shit, you know, and they thinking that us is so that some of us got privilege because we got a different skin color. Well, yeah, but it's the privilege that the same rascal that can take it away from you gives you. A house slave had privileges. Did you know that? So don't get confused. He was still a goddamn slave. Yeah, he had privileges. He could eat more of the scraps from the master's table. You know, so a white worker with privileges, you know, or somebody outside the ruling class that's white with privileges, that shit is temporary. You know, that's temporary. That's a temporary problem. But death is a permanent solution. And so that's what they're gonna give you if you step out of line.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for doing this with us, Frank. It's been, you know, incredibly insightful, I think. But before we go, do you have any, you know, final nuggets of wisdom you'd like to?
Well, y'all done work me today. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. I wasn't feeling too good this morning. I really didn't feel like coming on this show, but I wasn't going to cancel it because I consider Kent State very important. I consider that a watershed moment
so much
in our history. You know, so I'm honored that you invited me to come and speak on it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, and thanks so much to everyone who attended this. And you know, stay tuned to our social media. We'll have more events tomorrow with David Rivera from the